Cope Queens, Episode 18, Bipolar Disorder. There are many misconceptions regarding bipolar disorder. This mental impairment was previously known as manic depression, and it's basically a mental impairment that causes unusual shifts in energy levels, moods, activity levels, and concentration. Some people even experience what is considered a manic episode, which can present itself as long periods of high energy, a loss of sleep caused by the reduced need of sleep, and others can even experience a lost touch of reality. In this episode, I discuss bipolar disorder type 1 and 2 with comedian and podcaster Sofia Elkin and certified health and wellness coach Saralyn Salisbury-Jones. So with this episode, I share the conversation that I had with Sofia first, and then after Sofia, I'm going to share the conversation between Saralyn and I. I hope you all enjoy this episode. Make sure that you visit copequeens.com if you want to send me a message and let me know other topics that you'd like to hear me cover, or if you want to be a guest. I would love to hear your journey. Thank you for listening today, and we're going to just dive right in.
You're listening to the Cope Queens podcast, where every Wednesday host Elaina Jones challenges mental health stigmas by normalizing the conversation through sharing personal experiences about how seemingly everyday life challenges impact us. This podcast is in no way a replacement for mental health treatment. To learn more, visit copequeens.com. Now, without further ado, let's cope together.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, first of all. It's always great to be able to share my story because people have a conception of what someone who has bipolar disorder looks like, what their life looks like, which is usually messy. And it's nice to kind of come out with that, and people don't even expect it could be your friend, your neighbor, or anybody. Right. Bipolar 1 is when you actually have the manic episodes. They look different for everybody. I think overall you experience like almost the opposite of depression. So you have like a lot of energy and you're not necessarily happy. Not everyone's happy during manic episodes, but you are kind of on top of the world, which isn't the same as happy, which is weird and hard to describe, but you're kind of like, you feel like you're untouchable.
So you're on top of the world and you feel like you're invincible to a point, like you can do anything, you can conquer anything, sky's the limit, and very enthusiastic. You can have one idea one day and then 5 minutes later have another idea that's even better than that one. Is that what you mean there?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
How old were you when you were diagnosed?
So I was diagnosed with cyclothymia or cyclothymic disorder when I was 16, which is like very little like shifts of mood between depression and happiness. They don't call it mania. But then when I was, I believe, 18, I was diagnosed with bipolar type 2. And I was not diagnosed with bipolar type 1 until I was 22, which is when I had my first full manic episode, which is around an age where a lot of people have their first manic episode.
Was there anything in particular that you think triggered that, or was it just a matter of it was going to happen?
I think it was a combination of things. I had just moved to the US, so this was 2015, and I moved here. When I first moved here for like 8 months, I wasn't working or going to school or anything, so I really, for like 8 months, was just hanging out and like kind of finding myself and like working out and all this. So I was really happy. And so when it came out of nowhere, it kind of surprised me. It wasn't like I was going through anything rough at the time, but I was not really taking medication at the time. That's a large part of it. I say that to say it can kind of happen out of nowhere, unfortunately. But especially if you're not seeing a therapist, you're not taking medication, you're not taking the proper self-care for bipolar disorder.
And then for those who may not understand what a manic episode is, what did that look like for you? What did you experience?
So for me, I didn't notice I was having a manic episode for probably about the first month. My sister noticed it before I did because one of the things I had was that I was hypersexual. And my sister caught on to that pretty early on and was like, this, you're acting different. And then I started noticing it because one time I've never in my life, and even until now, like I don't drink and drive. I've never even had more than like one beer and gotten behind the wheel. But there was a day that I had like 3 drinks and I drove to my friend's house. And after that, the day after I was like, that's not like me. But in that moment, I was like, I don't care. It was like really risky. And I was like, whatever. I was like a little tipsy. And I think after that, I started noticing like I was doing more risky behaviors. And to some people, that means like they spend a lot of money on things that they don't need to, or they do drugs, stuff like that. For me, it thankfully never got too bad. But I was just overall kind of I was careless about my own safety and my own life.
Right. Okay.
So for me, it looked a lot like just risky behaviors, carelessness. I wasn't sleeping. I was sleeping about 2 hours a night. I was going to bed around 7, 8 in the morning every night. And I wasn't tired. I didn't feel like I needed to sleep. I was very productive, but I just wasn't sleeping. And so that long term, after a few months, it lasted a few months, that's just really bad for your body. And eventually, even if you're a mania, you get depressed because of your body so tired. I thought for a while that if I was too busy, I would get too stressed, which I mean, if anybody does, but I have found recently that if I have a very clear agenda, then I get into my thoughts and stay in bed and watch TV, and then that's not productive for my mental health. So like I watched a little bit of TV a day, that's fine, but I've found that getting busy. So just full-time school was just not enough. I mean, I was very busy, but it wasn't enough. But then I started doing comedy. And this was a way for me to fill in those gaps of free time when I okay, I don't want to do homework right now. So I'm just going to lay in bed and scroll through Twitter. That's not really great for my mental health. So now I have other side projects. So whether you're working full time or going to school full time, but having side projects, even if it's just knitting a scarf, anything you're doing that's keeping you kind of busy and keeping your mind busy, that has been so helpful.
Applause to your sister for noticing that something was off and for her having the courage to say something. Because I think a lot of times what happens is we notice things and we're just like, oh, maybe it's just a moment. But then when it's repeated behaviors that are what we deem outside of character, because for you at your age, someone could have said, oh, she's just being a young adult, 21, 22, living her life, having fun, partying. And no one would have been the wiser.
And I've always been very big on going to therapy and getting medication and stuff. So I was able to start going to therapy again. And the medication, it took a few months to get the right cocktail of it because you have to try different things. Yeah. But once I did, which was July 2016 until today, so almost 4 years later, I've stayed on the same doses of the same I take 3 medications. That's what I've been taking. And I've never had a manic episode again. And I think it's because now I know what they look like. So the moment that I start getting manic symptoms, I can recognize it and attack it and tackle it from the beginning. Just getting diagnosed already, now I know what's going on. So now I can recognize it.
What would you like people to know so that we can push past this stigma?
I think one of the most important things is that, and it sounds so cliche, but it's going to be okay, because even though something like bipolar disorder, it is chronic in the sense that I'm not going to just get a cure for it. I'm not going to get a vaccine for it. I'm going to have bipolar disorder my whole life. But if you get the proper help, then it's manageable. And there's even a chance that I will never again in my life have another manic episode, which is amazing. So you can live with it and you can be fine. But if you don't seek out help and get the proper treatment and help for it and take care of yourself, self-care is so important, then it's going to be a lot harder to deal with. So I would say even if your family, for example, doesn't support you in getting help, you got to do it for your own mental peace, if nothing else. People think that people with bipolar disorder are unstable emotionally and can't, for example, have a stable relationship, hold a job and things like that, and commit to things. And while sometimes there will be obstacles, and I do have no idea when I could get into a depressive episode or a manic episode, in general, it is manageable, and people with bipolar disorder can live perfectly regular lives and commit to things and have no issues, as long as other people are understanding of when we might need a few days to heal.
I want to thank Sofia again for coming on the podcast and sharing her story with us. And I will share details at the very end of the episode of how you can learn more about Sofia. Up next, we have Saralyn, a certified health coach who shares her journey with bipolar disorder.
I'm so excited to be here and take any opportunity to share more about my journey, help reduce stigma, and bring awareness on this topic. So thank you for having me. Not many people have heard that there are different kinds of bipolar. I think bipolar 2 used to be referred to as manic depression. And I think that some people still refer to it as that. It means that I've never had a full-on manic episode, but I've had what we call hypomania, which presents itself a little differently than full-on mania. And because of that, bipolar 2 seems to be often underdiagnosed, because hypomania can really just present itself as like they're a go-getter, like they're super ambitious and they're super creative, and those all of those things are true. But it took me a while to get to that diagnosis, because even though I was struggling with moods and shifting from highs and lows, all of the psychiatrists I had seen for a while were like, well, you've never been manic, so it's not a mood disorder. It wasn't until I kind of saw someone else and they were like, well, actually, there's this other kind that's bipolar 2, and this looks like what you have. So I think it's one of those that are often underdiagnosed, often misunderstood, because people are like, oh, it's like a lesser form of bipolar. And that's not exactly it either. It's just different.
When did you first sense that there was even a reason to see a psychiatrist?
Yeah, well, I started having mental health issues in college when I was in my early 20s, and that began presenting itself as panic attacks. I was a very type A person, so I was a perfectionist. I would have really horrible panic attacks. And for that period of time, it was like, okay, she has anxiety. She has generalized anxiety disorder. Mm-hmm. But then as I got into my later 20s, I started realizing that sometimes my moods would shift for no apparent reason. I would go through periods of extreme highs and as in feeling very happy, motivated, excited about life, confident, and then it would backswing really drastically into depression. And so I sort of observed this in myself. And at that point in time, I had been hospitalized once for suicide ideation in 2015. And then in 2018 is kind of when I hit my hardest mental health crisis. I was struggling with severe suicide ideation, and I was hospitalized back to back in late 2018. And that's when they were like, okay, we need to get you stabilized, because the highs and the lows are very rapid. Like I guess you would say rapid cycling bipolar 2. And it was so disorienting, because I got to a place where I never could really trust my emotions. Even when I was happy, I was like, is this real? Is this a symptom? And I felt so disoriented with the shift. For me, like I was just, oh, she's super ambitious. And for myself, it was hard, because there are a lot of advantages to feeling hypomanic, and I would be very productive and I would get a lot done. I didn't require as much sleep. I had a lot of energy. I was happy. So there were so many pros to being in those like hypomanic episodes. But then I realized if I didn't kind of manage those highs, the pendulum would swing back and I would crash. Even now, I've done a lot of therapy, and the method of therapy that's been a game changer for me is something called dialectical behavioral therapy. And it's very skills-based, and it gives you lots of tools and really cultivates that self-awareness. So now when I find myself feeling my wife will say, are you feeling a little hypo? Like she can sort of tell. I'll be talking really fast, or maybe I'm just like kind of bouncing from project to project. I'll be able to say, yeah, I am. Maybe I need to set some boundaries, make sure I'm getting enough sleep, make sure I'm managing that in a way that the backswing isn't debilitating. You know, I'm fortunate in that none of my periods of hypomania have put me in like dangerous or potentially scary situations. It really was just me feeling like my potential and feeling super creative. But sometimes it wasn't always effective, right? So I'm an entrepreneur, and it's funny because there's been studies on this that people with bipolar 2 tend to be entrepreneurs because we're very creative and we're go-getters, right? Yes. So for me, for hypomania, it would be like, okay, I'm feeling super creative. I have an idea. I'm going to stay up for 8 hours and just work on this idea. I'm going to get on my website and make all these tweaks for hours because I'm feeling inspired. And it can look like, oh, wow, they're very committed and excited. It can be not effective because I'm not thinking clearly. I'm not taking breaks. I'm not getting up to like walk around. I'm not sleeping like I should. There's no balance, right? right? So it's that very extreme tunnel vision, hyper focus. And I sort of have gotten to a place where I can capitalize a little bit on the benefits while tampering down the negatives. But it does get the best of me sometimes. And I am on a mood stabilizer. So that kind of keeps me more even. It's not something I'm trying to cure, but it is something that I've learned how to manage.
In comparison, what were the lows that you experienced?
When I had sort of a low mood, it would sometimes come out of nowhere unexpectedly, feelings and thoughts of worthlessness, feeling and thoughts of I can't fulfill like the potential that I know I have. It would go from being very high functioning to not functioning, where the idea of just like taking a shower was overwhelming, or just kind of moving through the day, questioning myself, self-doubt. And then at my lowest of lows, I was struggling with suicide ideation. And I'm happy to say that I haven't been in that dark of a place for at least a year because of all the therapy and work that I've done. But that is like a very real thing for many people who live with this diagnosis. My parents struggled with me, kind of taking on this diagnosis and treatment, because they're kind of like, you're not crazy, you're just emotional, or you're not, and I'm like, I didn't say I was crazy, because they have their own stigma about what it means to have this kind of diagnosis. And they would say, you're just creative, you're just, and I'm like, that is true, but it's also true that I have this mental health condition. And, kind of getting to a place where I need to just do what's right for me and not look to them, because, I'm a young woman, I'm 31. So even though I'm an adult, I still care about what my parents think. And when I went through all of this, I think their generation, what are people going to think? Especially because I talk openly about it.
Yes.
And they're like, why would people work with you if they know this about you? I'm like, it's a different world. People appreciate vulnerability nowadays, but they don't know that.
People label those of us who have mental impairments as crazy. And I just want us to erase that word. What would you say to someone that looks at it as like, oh, if you're bipolar, then that means you're crazy?
Well, I would say, for the person who maybe has that internal stigma that they think, oh, well, because I have this, it means I'm crazy. I would say that having this kind of diagnosis does present certain challenges, kind of force you to do a lot of inner work that other people don't necessarily have to do. But with that comes so many gifts and so many opportunities to impact the world. Oftentimes it's not so much we that need to be fixed, it's the way society perceives us that needs to be fixed.
Absolutely.
When I'm talking to people who are struggling in similar situations, I had to really get to a place where it wasn't just about managing anymore. Now I'm really able to thrive. And so just to kind of have that message of hope that I didn't want to be in and out of the hospital, the psych ward, for the rest of my life. And I'm lucky that I was able to do this intensive dialectical behavioral therapy program where I got all of these amazing tools and resources, but I had to pay for that out of pocket. And most people can't do that. I want to get to a place where everyone gets the resources and treatment that they need so that they can just not go from surviving, but they can go to thriving, because you can not just manage, you can thrive with this condition. And I used to be a lawyer, but I'm not in the activism world anymore. But I think everyone needs, access to the kind of treatment that I had, because it was a game changer.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you on the aspect of we need to have more resources available and affordable, because there are so many people in especially low income neighborhoods and communities who can't afford to get help. And I know that there are so many social workers trying to do the best they can to connect people with resources. Mental health care, it's expensive. And it's unfortunate that there aren't enough resources for everyone in the way that there needs to be?
It took a lot to get to this place where I am now. And it's because I have the supportive wife and because I had the best treatment options and because I had people in my corner, but not everybody has that. So I think great that you have this podcast and you're really sharing about these stories and building awareness, because the more we can kind of reduce the stigma and show people, you're not alone and you can live and manage and then thrive with these conditions is really, really important.
What type of reaction do you normally get from others when you do share?
By and large, most of the reaction has been positive. The blog I wrote that was, when I say I found healing, I'm not saying I found a cure. Here's why. And I talk about I'm not trying to cure myself. I'm practicing that acceptance and also cultivating change from a place of self-love. But I did come against some pushback, surprisingly, in spiritual communities. I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual, and I'm in a lot of these more, like, I guess some people would say new age stuff. There are a lot of people in those communities who think, oh, well, just exercise and eat right, and you don't need to take medication. And that's, big pharma is corrupting everyone. And they think that taking medicine and seeking traditional therapeutic options are not good. And they promote an alternative view. And in my mind, that can be extremely dangerous, because if you're telling people you shouldn't be on meds, maybe they'll take that to heart, go off their meds, and that's how people die or end up back in the hospital.
Such a dangerous message to put out there, because you don't know who could hear that and take that to heart, and what happens when they pray and nothing changes.
Right. And then you feel like you failed in some way, or failed God in some way, and it's to stay in your professional lane. If you're not someone's doctor, do not tell them they shouldn't take their medication. Do not tell them, don't diagnose them or undiagnose them. And because I'm a certified health coach, but there are many health coaches, I'm using air quotes right now, who, sell protein shakes or whatever. And they're like, this is going to help you with this, this, and this. And it's all fine and good to use essential oils and do all of these great things. Meditation, I love, but you need to make sure that you're not asserting yourself and that people are actually getting professional help, and you're not their doctor. You're not the expert, and helping someone is making sure they get the proper treatment.
All right, everyone, we've reached the end of another Cope Queens episode. To learn more about Sofia Elkin, you can check out her podcast. It's called Your Ex is Here. It's available on Spotify and several of the other platforms. And if you want to connect with her on Facebook and Instagram, you can find her by searching for Sofia Elkin Comedy. And to learn more about Saralyn, you can check out her website, SaralynSalisbury-Jones.com. Or you can follow her on Instagram at Saralyn_strong. And thank you again for listening. Take care, everybody.
You've reached the end of another episode of Cope Queens. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Visit copequeens.com for additional information and resources. Thank you for coping with us today.